Hello and welcome to the Klassiki podcast. I'm your host, Sam Goff. Klassiki is your window into the world of Eastern European film. Subscribers gain access to our library of classic and contemporary titles, as well as filmmaker interviews, video introductions, program notes, and much more. You can sign up for a free trial today at klassiki.online. And if you enjoy the show, then don't forget to subscribe in your podcast app of choice. And please leave us a review and a 5-star rating. Thank you. Critic, researcher, and friend of the show, Alisa Goruleva, is back on the pod this week for the second edition of the Klassiki Kino Club, our watch-along exploration of our ever-expanding catalogue. I asked Alisa to once again pick another film from our library that she hadn't seen before to sit down to discuss. And this time around, she plumped for a real Polish classic, Andrzej Munk's 1958 war satire Eroica, a cynical deconstruction of the myth of military heroism. After watching the film for the first time, Alisa joined me to discuss Munk's tragically short career, his place amongst the heroes of post-war Polish film, and Eroica's blend of black humour, despair, and disillusioned humanism. Hopefully you'll feel inspired to check out the film and to start exploring our library for yourselves. So follow the links in the show description to watch along with us on Klassiki and to read some of Alisa's writing for us in the journal. And leave us a review to let us know which films you'd like us to tackle next in the Klassiki Kino Club. Thank you. Alisa, welcome back to the podcast. How are you doing?
Thank you. I'm doing great. Very excited.
I'm glad to hear you're excited. And so am I. So this time around, when I asked you to plump for a film from the Klassiki library for us to watch, a film you hadn't seen before, you went with Eroica by Andrzej Munk from 1958. So why don't you tell people why you chose this film, and then maybe in doing so you can kind of briefly introduce the film itself as well.
Yes, sure. So to tell the truth, it was a bit of a blind guess because I'm not that of an expert on Polish cinema. Of course, I have my favorite filmmakers and directors, but the whole horizon of the Polish cinema is still a bit blurred for me. But I just feel that there is something interesting in the 50s and the decade of the 50s. And not to say that there was any decade that was simple and obvious, but the 50s, the world is still caught in the aftermath of World War II. And in terms of art and cinema, it became hard to talk about the reality after such terrible events. And for many people, it became increasingly problematic to continue making films the same way as before. So I feel like it led to a shift in aesthetic approaches. And that's what happened in the 50s. And if we talk about Eastern Europe, in Eastern Europe, it was also the second half of the 50s. It was a time of new freedoms. In Poland, we know that in 1956, there was a short time of, the equivalent of Soviet thaw. So a lot of films became possible. And that was the time when Munk started making some of his best films. And that was a time when the so-called Polish film school emerged with Andrzej Wajda and Jerzy Kowalewicz. So a few very strong voices came around. And yeah, I was just wanting to explore how the frustration, post-war frustration, and the new ways of speaking about it combine. And when I saw this film, Eroica, I was pretty surprised because it differs a lot from what I saw of early Andrzej Wajda and other films of this generation, because it lacks any sentimental feeling whatsoever and any poetic approach that we can see in Wajda's early films. Munk's film is very well calculated and as if he wants to distance his viewers from what he's showing. But now we can talk a bit about Munk's.
Sure. I mean, that's a lovely little overview there, and it raises so many questions. So I'm going to have to tread carefully, otherwise we'll go down a number of different rabbit holes. So yeah, like you say, obviously cinema throughout the world in the 50s and into the 60s obviously is living and working in the shadow of the Second World War, and in a country like Poland, obviously, I mean, like it's kind of a perfect storm for Poland in the sense that the sheer scale of horror, obviously, kind of inflicted in that country during the war, and then followed by this very intense kind of Stalinist period immediately after the war. There's a kind of a traumatic kind of blocking up and backing up of feeling and of expression, and then, like you say, as part of this kind of broader post-Stalinist moment in the Eastern Bloc, you have this sudden liberalization, and it produces in Poland. In Poland, you get what's called the Polish Film School, as you mentioned, which is this new generation of filmmakers, a lot of them coming out of the famous film school in Łódź, amongst them Andrzej Wajda, Jeśka Walowicz, Wojciech Haas maybe is a bit slightly later, Tadeusz Konwicki, people like this, and Andrzej Munk. I mean, I think it was Wajda who said, like the purpose of the film school, such as it was really to deal with the war. Like it was, it became this very influential movement. Some of the films kind of broke containment, became famous elsewhere. People may be aware of Ashes and Diamonds, the Andrzej Wajda film from the same year as Eroica from 1958, which kind of gained a degree of international notoriety. It's one of those films that Martin Scorsese is always talking about. And these were people like almost everyone in Poland. These directors were people who had like profound personal experience of kind of the trauma. I mean, Wajda's father was killed by the Red Army. Jerzy Skolimowski's family, a large number of members of his family were killed by the Nazis. Someone like Roman Polanski, famously, his mother died at Auschwitz. And Andrzej Munk himself certainly had extremely traumatic experience during the war, which we can get into. So yeah, it's this kind of broad return to the question of the war in the 50s, but then with this super heightened context in Poland that produces a lot of these really influential and important films. So, okay, Andrzej Munk. He's a pretty singular figure in this context. He only made 3 films before he was killed in a car crash in 1961. So he's kind of the tragic figure, if you like, of the Polish film school. What did you know about him going in, and like what do you think it's important for people to know about his place within this movement, this film school of the late 50s?
I knew only a little things about him. Like I know that he died pretty young during the shootings of the last film, and that a lot of the Polish filmmakers of the time praised him as their master. But I haven't really seen any of his films before. I've seen Eroica, but I did my homework and I watched a few. And there are 3 main feature films, but actually there are a lot more shorter films, and it's very interesting to see how these films shifted the way that Munk was able to say, because he started making films in the late 40s, and this were when he was still a student, and this was mostly, short documentaries that depicted right of socialist country. So they had a touch of propaganda in them, obviously. Some people now look back at them and say that Munk was able to depict real life through this propaganda frame, but still it's very ideological films. And then he started to blend documentary with fiction in such films like I forgot the name, the Blue Cross, so then he started to blend fiction and documentary in such films like Men of Blue Cross, where you have a lot of amateurs and professional actors reenacting the real events that happened in the mountains. And like, it's a really epic, almost mountain film. But later in the 50s, his tone shifted completely. So the two very satirical films came around, which is Eroica and Bad Luck. And these films are very particular in the way that they are commenting not just the past or the war, but the way the war was perceived by many people and by, the government. Because the Eroica, well, it's a very obvious deconstruction of concept of heroism going on in film.
Yeah, he's I guess the contrast or the comparison that people often draw when they're trying to situate Munk is with someone like Vida, who is, outside of Poland, and inside Poland as well, to be honest, much more towering figure. I mean, he was working into the 2010s. He handfuls of masterpieces, grand historian of Polish society. And the comparison that's drawn is between Vida's kind of, I guess you could call it romanticism or maybe idealism. Like Vida deals in these kind of grand sweeps of history, and he has heroes and villains, and there is a kind of romantic aspect to his films. They're very kind of humanist, Vida's films. And then there's Munk, who obviously has this much shorter career, which adds to the legend, who is the kind of anti-romantic or cynical side, if you like, of this 50s generation of filmmakers. And like you say, Eroica is probably the one that provides the starkest contrast there. I mean, even the title is a bitter joke, because it's a film about basically kind of deconstructing the pieties of, wartime propaganda, the classic Second World War film. And yeah, the fact that he died a few years later, I think he was still in his 30s when he died.
I think he was 39. Yeah.
Yeah. So that obviously, like I say, that kind of adds to the legend. Okay, so let's just get into the film itself then, Eroica. And I think we can use it as a way to talk about Munk's own wartime experience, which is very important to know about when you're watching the film. So yeah, this is a kind of satire, I guess, a black comedy, which is basically two short films. It's kind of divided into two. They have these musical titles. The first one is called Scherzo alla Polacca, which I think literally means Polish joke. And then the second one is called Ostinato Lugubre. The first half, the first film, is about this self-serving guy who is kind of crossing back and forth across the lines between kind of Nazi-occupied Warsaw and the area controlled by Polish forces, and basically trying to save his own skin whilst also kind of trying to help the Polish patriotic resistance and the kind of the scrapes he gets into. And then the second half of the film is set in a German internment camp, like a prisoner of war camp for Polish officers. And it's about two young officers who turn up, who are interred in this camp. And the kind of claustrophobic craziness, basically, of these officers who have been locked up for kind of 4 or 5 years in this camp, and their kind of self-delusions and the absurdities of their kind of officer class pretensions in this setting. So yeah, I mean, that's the basic structure of the film. Let's just get into it. I mean, what were your first reactions? I don't know if you were expecting anything. Like I said, you said you weren't a big Munk head beforehand, so I don't know what you were expecting. But what leapt out at you first off?
So I mean, in the first film, everything seemed bizarre to me at first. Like nothing made any sense, starting out from the first scene when we have some military trainings and the main character whose name is Babyface. Everyone calls him Babyface, which is also a bit absurd. He runs away from this military training because there are planes coming, and he got simply afraid. And he returns home, and that scene at home is also a very bizarre and chaotic one. He comes home. There's his wife who looks like a Hollywood star, and there is a Hungarian officer who is dressed like, I'm not really well familiar with the military uniforms, but he looks like he's, I don't know, 19th century officer. And they start talking. They talk, I think, like 3 or 4 languages at the same way, trying to build communication, like obviously Polish, Hungarian, German, English, a bit of French to build this communication. And this Hungarian officer, who seems to be a lover of Babyface's wife, he tells Babyface that Hungarians need his help to connect to the Russians because the Germans are losing. So that he gives this main character, a very unheroic character, a very important mission, which can lead to basically a peace in the country. And this main character, obviously, he sets on the mission without any patriotic convictions. He just, driven by some weird force, because he wants to survive, he wants to hustle. And the interesting thing is that I started watching it, I immediately thought of a completely different film, which is Rossellini's General della Rovere, which is also have this a very opportunistic character in the middle of the war. He, well, also kind of hustling, and he tries to earn money on the misfortunes of others. But this character, he eventually transforms into a hero. And nothing of this kind happens in Munk's film.
It certainly does not.
Yes, the character does all of the weird things. He crosses his fire being drunk. He flirts with all the women around him. It's a very carnival film, and the main character is a very picaresque figure, basically.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it.
So the romantic idea of sacrifice is replaced with this confusion, chance, and chaos. Well, what is also, strikingly absent in this film is the clear definition of what is good and bad. And this definition, I think it's foundational for war films, especially when it comes to propaganda narratives, the ones that Munk obviously opposes in this film. So in such films, we usually present it with, obvious villains and heroes, and the cause of the heroes is unquestionable. But in this film, all certainties are blurred. There is not, we cannot be certain of anything. And yeah, instead of the clearness, there is just confusion. So what I think Munk does, well, he puts this idea of heroism to the context completely unsuitable for it. Because how can you be truly a hero when you don't know what good and bad is?
Yeah.
Also, I think it's not a film about that tries to accuse Polish people of the lack of bravery. What film really does is, like I said, it's deconstruct the whole concept of heroism, which for a long time had been central to the socialist canon, basically.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned bravery there, because when I was watching it, that kind of jumped out to me, in lights as the theme, if you like. I thought the first part of Eroica was about bravery and the second part was about dignity, but we can get to the second part. Yeah, I mean, I think what's really interesting is how the setup, in plot terms, really could be like any classic World War II film, right? It's about a kind of mission behind enemy lines in order to help beat the Nazis.
It could be a spy film,
Yeah, it's like, so, basically this guy Babyface winds up getting given this mission basically to act as a liaison between this Polish resistance and these Hungarian forces, to try and kind of guarantee the Hungarian support for the Polish resistance. That's the premise. And like I say, like that could be, I'm sure there literally is a film somewhere that has almost the exact same plot in a much more kind of classic war film sense. And then very quickly, very quickly, it's like Munk has a list of all kind of pieties, you know, or kind of cliches or the values of war films. And it's like he's running through them, ticking them off as he makes fun of them. So he makes fun of the idea of volunteering for the army, because we have this character, the first we see of him is him running away from basic training. We have the idea of the patient, loyal wife on the home front, you know, like he walks into the house and she's clearly flirting with and sleeping with this strange Hungarian officer. You have the idea of, you know, an alliance of the good guys, because here this potential alliance between Hungary and Poland is entirely self-serving. You have this, you know, the idea of patriotism is made fun of. There's even a scene where Babyface has to help some old Polish woman on the road to carry her stuff. They're being kind of escorted by the Nazis. And in any other film, it would be this kind of tender little symbolic moment, quite trite. And it just immediately breaks down into bickering, and he's shouting at the old woman and she's shouting at him. He's trying to throw her stuff away. So yeah, it's like he sets up a list of all these pieties and then just kind of bang, 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 just immediately deconstructs them. And the one that is super interesting, I think, is the idea of the uprising, the Warsaw uprising.
That was actually something that surprised me, the way he was able to picture the uprising at the times. Although, yeah, okay, maybe it was the time of liberalization, but still, that was pretty straightforward what he did.
I think it's the most daring part of it. I mean, so, you know, the Warsaw Uprising, this kind of abortive, fight back against the Nazis from occupied Warsaw, which occupies this very privileged, heroic position in kind of Polish national history and Polish thinking about the Second World War, right? And our protagonist, Babyface, we learn was there. It feels wrong to call him a kind of veteran because that feels too official. But, you know, he was involved in it. And it's just, instead of being this kind of grand, tragic, nationalistic sacrifice, it's just, he refers to it as a joke. He dismisses it out of hand. The sense is that it was a waste of time, and that and that he kind of laughs at the idea of treating it seriously. And this is super interesting because Munk was I think Munk fought in the Warsaw Uprising. And then, you know, when it failed, he was able to escape out of Warsaw, I think back to Krakow or something, and then to kind of hide out for the rest of the war. So yeah, I thought that was particularly interesting.
And the first film is, well, it's a type, you know, of a mockery film. And the second one is completely different. And the way I think about it is, well, because the name Eroica comes from Beethoven's Third Symphony of the same title. And if you know, try to listen to Eroica and then you think about the first part, the first tale, it seems very comical, the way this music interacts with the story. But when you listen to the Eroica and you think of the second story, it feels very tragic and very dramatic to me. So,
in what sense?
Well, I think that when it comes to the second part, the Munk is being less cynical, but he depicts this type of community being really doomed and frustrated, and like there is no way out for them. And that's what the ending of the film is basically for me, when we see this prison shot and them, the characters going around inside the prison. But if we're talking about the second,
I guess we are jumping forward then to the second part. I mean, even the titles of the two parts, right, are very indicative of the mood, because the first one is called Scherzo, and the second one is Lugubrious. So yeah, the second part I actually found, I don't know about you, I found the second part much more interesting. I think the cinematography is a lot more interesting, partly because they're working with these very tight, confined spaces, and I think it produces a lot more interesting
Very,
ideas and
very obscure
perspectives.
film.
But yeah, basically, like the premise, like I said before, is these two young officers introduced to this prison of war camp for Polish officers, where basically all the other inmates have been there for years and have developed this strange, paranoid, slightly deranged kind of community in this camp. And it's all about the idea of, I guess, living with dignity in this circumstance, and the idea of maintaining that officer class decorum, and also the stories or the lies that these people tell themselves, because they have basically sat out the entire war in these bunk beds in this camp, and they're kind of all haunted by the idea that they all should have tried to escape, right? This is their duty was to try to escape, and they all have kind of invented their own justifications for why they haven't and why they've stayed there. And then the kind of final joke in that respect is that there was this one officer who did escape, Zawistowski, and he's become this mythological figure, this hero. And everyone in the camp refers to him as this, almost like a kind of, like I said, like a mythical figure. He's almost not real anymore. He's become the standard that they all live up to. And then we discover that actually this Zawistowski guy has been living in the ceiling the entire time. He never left the camp, and he's been hiding out in the plumbing. And that's the final kind of punchline, if you like, of the whole film, is just the image of this heroic mythical figure just kind of pathetically curled up inside these pipes above the bathroom.
He's not only hiding, he also got sick and eventually dies out there, which I think adds to the whole obscurity of this situation. But what I also wanted to add is, well, I think when we have any disciplinary space as a main setting, whether it's school or prison, it almost invites you to a broader conceptual reading, to see this space as an image of, social relationships. And I think Munk really gives you the opportunity to read this group of people in terms of a frustration of the nation. And the other thing is that there are a lot of films about prison and film history, obviously. And most of these films are films about escape, about how you escape the prison, with only a few exceptions. But this film, it's about the idea of escape, which becomes enough for these people to carry on their routine. And their imprisonment, it does become a routine, because we don't see it as in something extraordinary circumstances. It becomes a routine, and that's a very scary and depressing result, I think.
Yeah, I think the classic prison and prison escape film, the idea is always, that there's this spark of human dignity that can't be contained by the walls of the prison, and then the escape is, it's like the expression of this human yearning for freedom, this human dignity or whatever. I mean, it's Shawshank Redemption. It's any number of films. And this one, like you say, it completely hollows out that entire idea. This is, I guess, what I'm thinking about when I say that, like, compared to Vaida is a humanist in that, like, there is a set of kind of values, human values, kind of maybe even kind of liberal human values in Vaida's films that kind of carry them forward, even when he's dealing with very tragic subject matter. Whereas Munk, it's just, there's nothing, like, the whole thing is about making a joke about the idea of human values, which I think it's probably a much more accurate way of talking about prison. I mean, what prison does is it dehumanizes you, and to then have that whole kind of the patina of military dignity and valor laid on top of it just makes it all more kind of darkly humorous. So yeah, by the time we get to the end of the second part of the film, like you say, the mythical heroic figure is dead, has died in a sewage pipe of tuberculosis, and the final shot of the film is of all these prisoners shuffling around in a circle in the yard of their prison camp, which is obviously very symbolic image. I guess what I wanted to think about, just kind of stepping back in closing, is whether or not Eroica and maybe Munk's other films, if you want to bring them up as well, seeing as you've been watching them, whether they are actually totally cynical and cold. We've been using this as the shorthand to kind of distinguish what his character in relation to other Polish films at the time. Certainly he doesn't leave any kind of sacred cows standing over the course of the film, but for you, when the film ended, was the overall impression one of kind of total coldness and total kind of caricature of these characters, or was there something there, some kind of warmth? Do you feel like he has some regard or some affection for these characters and their situation?
Definitely. I mean, Eroica is indeed a very cold and tough film and cynical at parts, but especially the second tale, the second part of it. But I see it as more of a broader commentary on the socialist ideology, a system that so heavily relied on the figure of the hero that it kept constructing and sustaining myths. But Munk shows how this whole idea of heroism doesn't actually lead to any inner freedom. And in that sense, in the way that he directly addresses the topic, his film feels incredibly humanistic because it doesn't produce any myth. Instead, it destroys one. So I would read it as an allegory, a very liberating allegory.
Yeah, I guess it is. There's a kind of liberation in being able to let go of the idea and to focus in on the reality, the kind of lived reality of fighting the resistance or being imprisoned. I think on that point, like it's like you mentioned, it the title comes from Beethoven's Third Symphony, Eroica, and the famous kind of backstory behind that symphony, right, is Beethoven wrote it in honor of Napoleon when he thought Napoleon was a hero, history on horseback, and then when Napoleon declared himself emperor, Beethoven was totally disillusioned and famously kind of wrote Eroica, meaning heroic, as a kind of ironic, bitter joke as the title of the symphony, and that's how we now know it. And so you can't be disillusioned if you don't have some kind of kernel of faith in the idea in the first place, I guess is the point.
I totally agree.
All right, well, that's Eroica. You mentioned you'd been watching some of Munk's other films. I don't know if you wanted to recommend any of those. I mean, there are only 3 of them, so it shouldn't take you too long. But if people watch Eroica and are particularly taken by it, what can they expect from the other 2 Munk features that survive?
So actually, the first film I would recommend to watch is his last unfinished film, which is called The Passengers.
That's the film he was shooting when he was killed. Yeah.
At the time he died, and the film was obviously unfinished, but a few years after he died, some of his friends and fellow directors finished it, but they did it in a very smart way. So they gathered all the material that was already shot, they put it together, all the scenes that were already edited, and they framed them with commentary, their own commentary. So it doesn't look like a film that was done and finished by someone else, but it's Munk film, or what is left out of that. And the whole story, it's a very disturbing film about the Nazi camp overseer and one of the prisoners, both of them female, and it's a very power dynamic, dark story. And although it's just an hour long and we don't have a lot of material left, but some of the Auschwitz images are one of the most disturbing I've ever seen in a fiction film. So that would be the one I would recommend to watch.
We should say as well, and my bad, I don't think we mentioned this to this point, but Munk was born into a Jewish family, and much of the Second World War he was in hiding in Warsaw, working under a false identity, and that's the situation he was in when he took part in the Warsaw Uprising. So for him the stakes were obviously incredibly high in that regard, and the fact that he was making a film about the camps when he died is obviously extremely freighted, with personal meaning. I would say I was thinking about other films that are available on Klassiki that people might want to team up with Eroica. And the two that came to mind, tell me what you think. One was Closely Observed Trains by Jiří Menzel, one of the founding films of the Czech New Wave, which is also a film about how sometimes you accidentally find yourself taking part in a dangerous anti-Nazi resistance movement when you're just trying to kind of get the girl or have a nice time. It's a very different, it's much warmer, it's much more humanist.
It's much warmer, exactly. That's what I wanted to say. So maybe it's a good combination
It's a good combination, but it does end up in a pretty dark place by the end of it. So I thought that might be a good pairing. And then the other one I was thinking about, which is one of my favorite Second World War films, is Alexei German's film 20 Days Without War, which I'm really proud that we have on Klassiki, which is the plot. We won't get into the plot of it, but it's another film about a character who is kind of meant to stand for a lot of kind of heroic military kind of values, and who goes on this kind of personal journey into disillusionment and cynicism while he's on a kind of a period of leave from the front line. I think it's a really interesting film, and it has something of German is obviously the master, but it has something of that kind of claustrophobic quality that especially the second half of Eroica certainly shares.
Definitely. And it's also like a wonderful example of a film that shows how the war doesn't leave you when you're not, even if you're in the ceasefire and you're somewhere far from the front line, but the way that the war stays with you and with the others around you as well.
Yeah, and the war certainly was still with Munk and with all his other cohort when they were working in the 50s. All right, well, I think that probably does it for Eroica and for this edition of the Kino Club. Alisa, thanks so much for bringing that film to the table and sitting down and talking about it with us today. Thank you.
Thank you so much for inviting me.